All right, we are live on a late Wednesday evening edition of Martinis with Scott, episode number 17. Thank you for those that join us and those that are listening to this episode after it has gone live. Martinis with Scott is an in-depth conversation about winning at business. And we're targeting the show to help business owners, management, entrepreneurs, and today directors and shareholders. And we're coming to you from Toronto today, back in the east on Bay Street in Toronto. I flew all night and didn't get any sleep, so hopefully I make it through this show. Remember to subscribe, YouTube, podcast, Spotify. That helps us a lot. And today I have two special guests with me. Immediately to my right is Chris Mathers and Jay Richardson to Chris's right. And why don't before I introduce the topic that we're going to cover today, why don't you go over your career a little bit? Let the audience know who they are.
Music,
no, that's coming off. See, now it sounds so quiet. I don't even know that it's on anymore.
Okay. So I am a retired RCMP officer, now in private practice, doing consulting on anti-money laundering, fraud, compliance, due diligence, etc. And I advise boards on what they should and shouldn't do. Okay.
This seems to be the evening for the old wrinklies. I'm a retired partner of KPMG and E&Y, Toronto, Vancouver, Singapore, Italy, London, England. And I have since retirement in 1993 been practicing as a company doctor, dealing with business problems and taking on more and more roles as independent director, chairing audit committees, acting as interim CEO of listed public companies on half a dozen occasions, just generally playing in traffic and having fun.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining me. Last week on Martinis with Scott, we did a unusual review of a company, CannTrust Holdings, which is a cannabis company in Canada, trading on the TSX and also cross-listed onto the New York Stock Exchange. It's unusual because we don't typically do current events on this show. This is more about lessons to help business owners and management win at business, but CannTrust is a great case study. I mean, if you're focused on troubled companies, it's a terrific case study, and it was heading into an August long weekend, so I just thought it would be a fun thing to try. Now that we've done it, we're going to do part two on CannTrust today, and not because we're heading into a long weekend, but because this is just this company is the gift that keeps on giving. If you're looking for lessons, not if you're a shareholder. So lots of news today. In fact, there was an article in the Globe and Mail, I think this morning. I picked it up last night on the plane online, but that was about what was it about? It was about Acito, the former CEO, notifying the board in December 31, that there was no corporate governance and he was being frustrated. Yeah. Not public information, just to the chairman. You'll bring that up later and correct me on my facts on that.
What does that mean? What does corporate governance mean to him?
That he wasn't being allowed to do what he wanted to do. He was being questioned in a way that he seemed to find a little bit untoward and frustrating to what he was trying to do. Who knows what he was trying to do?
It may also mean that they were growing cannabis illegally and they hadn't stopped yet. Thank you, Ashley. What are we drinking today?
I don't think he would have been that candid.
This is the Fernie?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thanks, Ashley.
You're sticking with the water, right?
Yeah, that's
you
water.
want it for there?
That's water.
Okay.
Now you burned me in front of 50,000 people.
No, that's all right. That's what you
Cheers.
wanted. We often that's good. We often have Olga as a guest host, and she doesn't drink.
No.
So we're used to the water around here.
Well, I do drink. I just can't drink right now.
Got things on the go.
Yes.
So last week when I talked about CannTrust, I went over my first three rules of turnaround, which are just, you need to mentally acknowledge that you're in trouble. Not to outside stakeholders, although you need to do that as well, but to yourself. Because once you've gotten over that hurdle, everything else becomes a lot easier, right? You know that as a company
Absolutely.
doctor. That's number one. If you can't do that, and I think, actually, Chris, I want to ask you later in this episode, it just fascinates me how this company, CannTrust, just spent so much time focusing on the wrong problem. They kept talking about quality, and they weren't talking about securities violations or accounting problems or anything.
But I think this whole thing, there's been a comedy of errors here, not a very funny comedy, and ultimately, and I'm sure you guys are much more into this than I am, but I think the biggest challenge right here is for Health Canada, because they can either hammer these guys super hard and the company will cease to exist, and then all the shareholders are going to lose all their money and have to try and get it back through class actions or what have you.
They have to.
Yeah. Or wipe out the board, wipe out management, put in new people, and maybe try and get some value back into the company.
Which is what I said last week. I said the company should have proactively wiped out everybody.
Yeah.
Whether they were right or wrong.
Yeah.
It doesn't even matter if they were involved.
I just don't think that there's any alternatives at this point. I think it's too late, Chris. I think that this company is toast.
But they have assets, and
They have
that's
a
the
greenhouse
thing.
without a
Okay,
license.
a greenhouse without a license,
Worth a few dollars a square foot.
but Health Canada has an obligation, not a de facto obligation, but they should have to keep in mind that there's a whole bunch of punters out there who put their money in this, and now they're going to lose. And
I don't see how that's the regulator's
I don't see
problem.
how
I've never
Well,
seen a
no,
regulator
it's not
worry
the-
about that.
It's not the regulator's problem, but this is Canada.
Right. What Health Canada's problem, beyond the obvious of dealing with the illegal activity, is they need the capacity. They need
Yeah,
cannabis.
That's a very secondary consideration. Their
There's plenty of
primary
other-
consideration
Well, because-
is setting the example for all of the other participants
But
in the
exactly.
industry.
For every
that this is
kilogram
totally
of
unacceptable behavior.
legal, it's now legal cannabis, right? So every kilogram of legal cannabis you get rid of is another kilogram of illegal cannabis that's going to hit the streets, right? But you can have your cake and eat it too.
Guys, this is
So-
the drug business, okay? It's the drug business. It doesn't work like other businesses. The government seems to think that if they get involved in the drug, and I said this in my book, the Canadian government, the only people that could sell drugs and lose money at it, if they think that being involved in the drug business is going to eliminate illegal drugs, they should take a look at cigarettes. They should take a look at alcohol. These things, and gambling, these things are all legal now, but the bad guys are still up to their ears in it. And that's not going to stop. They have a shortage of supply. The government has the shortage of supply. The people using the drugs, they don't have a shortage of supply.
Yeah.
No, the people on the street can buy weed anywhere, anytime.
So if you
There's
take a
tons of it
significant
out there.
greenhouse out of commission, it just
Then
makes
the
that problem
legal
work.
pot becomes not as accessible, but the
And-
illegal
and-
stuff is still there.
But arguably, both of you are correct that Scott is focusing on those who want to buy legally, because there is a whole constituency that is not prepared to buy illegally.
Mhm.
And for them, there may be.
But part of the role of this legislation is to kill the black market.
Absolutely.
And
Well,
to do that, you have to have supply in
but it
the
won't.
legal market.
It won't, because for a number of reasons, but because the black market, because these guys don't have credit. You can't just call your guy and pay him later, whereas you can on the street. And also you can get better quality weed on the street than you can from these guys, because Health Canada regulates the level of THC in this, whereas the stuff on the street can be super
So
powerful.
like better quality, more
Overproof.
potent.
Yeah, more
Yeah.
potent, except you've got the chances that it might be adulterated with, fentanyl or something, but
Apart from that. Okay, so the three things we covered last week was admit you're in trouble, define that trouble well. The second thing is make changes. Just make changes in the management, your board, get rid of the people. Even if you're not right, you need to convince your external stakeholders, that would be the class action suits, the shareholders, the regulators, that you're taking this seriously and you're cleaning house and going on again. And then the third is to have a plan, right? Don't say you're looking at it. Don't say you're going to research it. Don't say that we hired some consultants and an investment banker to do a strategic alternatives review. Come forward with a plan right now.
Yeah.
And it may not work, right? You need to revise your plan. You know this from turnarounds. You just revise your plan all the time. But that's okay. You
But
just
isn't
need
the
to-
new CEO like an ex-board member? Wasn't he a board member?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
He was there when
he has the stench of death
when it went
upon
down.
him.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about
Certainly
today on
implicated.
CannTrust is not the same three topics. We're going to move into talking about the roles of a chairman, directors, independent directors, officers such as a CEO and a CFO, and general employees, and what are the different roles that those group of people have in this sort of illegal situation? What could they have done differently before they knew about it or before the illegal activity was taking place? So in other words, what internal controls and systems could they have had to stop it? Once they found out, what could they have done differently? And what can they do now, if anything? Right? That's going to sort of frame what we talk about today. And then there's a couple of other topics I want to hit, like my pet peeve of having the investigation being done by the quote unquote independent directors and not going outside the firm. But why don't, Jay, maybe you want to start with can you explain generally the difference between a chairman, a director, an independent director, an audit committee chair, a CEO? One of the things that the new CEO who came in, I forget his name at the moment, Markovich, I want to say.
Yes.
Yeah, Markovich.
His interview on BNN, he said, "Hey, look, we're directors. Directors direct, and management. We got bad information from management." And that's another thing. That's another on my long list of pet peeves on this file. That statement was one of them. Maybe you could talk a bit about the different roles.
Well, the fact is that directors are dependent on what they hear from management, and the different roles. If you start at the top, the chairman is the one who presumably has had a significant role in assembling the board and then manages the board, manages the relationship with management. And he's almost certainly going to be influential in deciding who will be the chair of the audit committee. The chair of the audit committee chairs that committee that has the quarterly responsibility for reviewing the financial statements, ensuring that they pass muster for filing on CDAR in a public company, and a whole lot of other responsibilities, sometimes even getting into governance, but oftentimes there is a separate governance committee. Members of the audit committee are members of the board of directors who are also members of that audit committee, are expected to be financially fluent, and are the initial body for review of the financial statements before the audit committee approves them for forwarding to the board for the board approval prior to their being filed on CDAR. Management are the day-to-day managers, and the prime relationship is that between the CEO, who is responsible for all of the other management, albeit the CFO has to be appointed by the board, but will usually be with the CEOs having made the initial recommendation to the board.
Right.
But with respect to everybody except the CFO, it's up to the CEO as to whom he hires on what terms within the business plan that the board has approved as a whole, which is the governing document for the business's operations and ambitions.
You good with that? You want to jump in on any of that?
Yeah, Jason's right on. Ad nauseum. Too many audit committee members are just CAs and CPAs, and all they concern themselves with are the financials. And if there's no governance committee, the audit committee is supposed to take that mantle. And I looked at the terms of reference of the audit committee for CannTrust, and it's all about the financials. Making sure, as Jay said, that their filings are done properly, et cetera, and everybody's obeying the rules. This is the drug business. It attracts all sorts of people, and you can see from what happened here, they went down that slippery slope integrity-wise. This is what they said. This is the email, allegedly.
You know, I'm the biggest proponent of the slippery slope of crime.
Well, just
But
listen
is
to what
this
this
really
guy said.
slippery? Like, if you have to go out and plant a seed, that's not really slippery, right?
No, just listen to this. This is the email, okay, that the compliance guy allegedly sent to the chairman of the company after Health Canada did their first review. We dodged some bullets, he says. Health Canada did not ask about those rooms, which are unlicensed rooms currently full of plants. Now, if that's not a smoking gun.
And this is in the fall of last year.
Yeah. This is before Lalonde, the guy that was their manager,
But
ratted
this didn't
everybody
go to
up.
the full board. This went to the chairman.
Went to the chairman, whose
So
company is owning a significant amount of stock. Then when we go over to the SETI insider filings, allegedly, lawyers out there listen to what I'm saying, allegedly, after that email, a week later, they started dumping stock.
I'm not even sure you need to say allegedly.
23rd of
because it's
November.
documented on
Yeah, it's from
SEDA.
SETI. 23rd of November, they
And
made
those are
$20
filings.
million.
Those are filings
Yeah.
that the individuals had to make themselves.
Yeah.
And so
30th
they
of
have
November.
acknowledged that they
Another
have
$10 million.
participated in this way.
6th of December, $10 million. 11th of December, $10 million. 14th of December, $10 million.
You're just envious, Chris.
It's a textbook.
Yeah. You know what? You know what bothers me the most about this is that we're not in the United States.
Yes.
Because if we were in the United States, people would go to jail over this.
And they may still,
Not
because
a
it's
chance.
listed,
Okay,
it's
you-
listed in the United States.
Well, if they extradite them, maybe they will. Yeah.
Uh,
But in
You've raised
Canada,
a couple
maybe
of points
It's
that
going
I
to be
wanted
fun to watch. Chris.
Absolutely.
It's going to be fun. This is going to be great theater.
It's not unlike the Roman gladiators. You know, you're sitting in the stands getting a little bit of blood on you, but it's still entertaining.
Yeah. Depends whose blood. Public company versus private. Everything that you said about the roles is also true in a private company. Dead on,
Except that private
your-
companies don't tend to have those independent boards.
because your stakeholder group is much more narrow.
It's concentrated.
Yes, right.
It's usually the directors.
But if you have at a private company, if you have a board of advisors, that's similar to
It
An
can
independent
be
director
if you
role.
have empowered that board, but
Yeah.
oftentimes private companies have boards of advisors that they don't empower, and then they're basically window dressing.
That's
Yeah.
a fact.
Yeah.
That's an absolute fact. I'm on a couple of those, or at least was. No, that's it. You know, we say we're a board of advisors. You have to actually have a meeting or two once in a while,
Yeah.
instead of just trading on our names on your website.
Okay, so let's cut to the chase on what these group of people should have been doing differently before and during the illegal activity.
Can we start with the CEO?
I would like to start with the independent director. I'm going to assume. By the way, I want to say something that Chris said allegedly before. We've picked up all the facts as best we can from the press, from public filings on SETI and other places, from corporate press releases. Honestly, I don't really care that much about the facts. We're trying to help business owners learn some lessons. If we have the facts wrong, then we have the facts wrong. We're not really here to talk about CannTrust as much as to use it as an example of how to learn and what the consequences are for doing this sort of thing. So keep that in mind as we go through. And none of us here are securities advisors. Do not trade on any of this, even though we all think it's going to zero, but don't trade on that. Right. So,
And we're just going to take this as a shorthand for every time giving the exculpatory statements as to we don't necessarily know all the facts and that we're doing this as an example.
I'll give you a fact. Let me give you a fact. This is a fact. I got it from LinkedIn. The guy who was their compliance officer, Lee, up until 5 years ago, he was a school teacher. He taught English in high school. All of a sudden, now he's a compliance officer.
there's a lot of big words with that legislation.
I think there must be. At any rate, the rumor is they may have hired a new guy today. I don't know.
I saw on Twitter on the way in the door they hired somebody. I didn't have a chance to research it.
Yeah. Okay.
Jay, let's assume the chairman was part of this. Not because I have any information that he's part of it, but just to exclude him from the conversation. You are an independent director in this situation.
and I'm happy to start with the assumption that he is a part to the extent that clearly he knew things that apparently did not get passed to the rest of the board. And that
Because he
in
started trading.
itself, yes.
Yes.
And he was the recipient of that email. that
Oh,
Nurses
right.
just read.
Okay, good point.
Yeah. Allegedly.
And yeah. And so this introduces, I'm not going to call it a firewall because it's not going to save anybody from getting touched, but it introduces a division between those who knew and those who did not know, because the board members as individuals, well, they ought to be inquisitive, probing.
You had one real asset.
Sorry?
You had one real asset. You had a big greenhouse,
Mhm.
right? How far is it away? Hour and a half, hour 45 minutes,
116 miles.
right? You and I talked about this yesterday on the
Yeah.
phone, and you and I've asked you to come in as a director in a similar company,
Yes,
right? And you've been a director of more than one
correct.
of a similar company. How cool was it for you and I to go tour the greenhouse,
Yeah.
knock on the walls?
But we were dependent on the tour leader. We were being
I would have seen a
marshaled
false wall.
around.
It wasn't
I
a
would've-
false wall.
Was it a tarp?
It was just they did it so they could take photographs to send to Health
That's
Canada.
right.
So they just hung plastic down so that you couldn't see the weed that was growing on the other side.
Right.
And then they took the pictures and they pulled the plastic.
So in fact,
Right.
when you were being toured, the curtains might not even have been there.
And had they
So
been there,
that-
you would have seen around.
so that they would have been demonstrating how much more crop they had. Mind you, that could be ultimately one of the things that hangs them, is that there doesn't appear to have been anybody making the relationship between number of plants planted, expansion plans, schedule for future plantings, what the crops are, how that translates into revenue. These are all pretty solid relationships that certainly the CFO, the chair of the audit committee, ought to have been undertaking to verify that these are reasonable numbers that are being presented to them and that they're consistent
I wanna come back
with
to
what's
that.
been
I'm going
licensed.
to come back to that later because I'm not sure that I get as an accountant how I'm figuring this out. Apart from walking around and seeing the plants growing where they shouldn't be growing, but there's no cost to these plants, right? So it's not like I spent a bunch of money that I shouldn't.
There are fairly predictable relationships that are variable depending on what your growing methods are, but fairly predictable relationships between number of square feet, number of plants, number of kilograms of individual crop or annual crop.
He should have
whichever.
picked it up from the revenue side, perhaps, which is
Absolutely.
what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
Everybody seemed to know in management that something was amiss. And
I
this
think they all knew.
This is an integrity issue. They just thought, you know what? It's not a big deal. Because chances are, given the bureaucracy, I would hazard a guess that the unlicensed rooms are probably all set up the way they're supposed to be with the proper.
They ultimately got licensed.
Yeah,
So
and,
of
and
course
they
they
would
were.
have. Yeah, they would have been licensed anyway. They
Which
just
is
jumped the gun.
Which is why they kept press releasing.
Yeah,
We don't have a quality problem.
No quality concerns.
No, but they jumped the gun because they figured, it's not that big a deal.
Unbelievable. What the hang is licensing all about if it's
Well,
not that big a deal?
In the
Mr. Mayor?
absence of the trading, they might have gotten through this, but. No,
You think so?
yeah, I think they might have gotten a slap. This is Canada, okay? Nobody gets sanctioned for anything. You think the OSC is going to do
Certainly
anything?
are reaching a new level of cynicism here.
Pardon me. 44 years of doing this. The OSC is going to, nothing's going to happen here. No one's going to see the inside of a jail cell. They might lose a bit of money, maybe, but you have to understand that in this country, these are wealthy people. The laws don't really apply to them.
How many people in the last decade in Canada have gone to jail for securities?
Garth. Garth.
Conrad and who else?
Well, yeah,
Yes.
Conrad went to the
But he
States.
went to
though.
the US.
He
That
wouldn't
doesn't
even have
count.
been arrested here in Canada. Garth and a couple of other minor players, and that's about it. People, this is Canada.
It's a
People,
pretty select fraternity.
it
And
is.
do they go to jail just because they piss people off?
I don't
For the
know,
most
maybe
part, as opposed to
They certainly make themselves visible, don't
yes.
they?
Look, they go in, they do the back nine at Gravenhurst, 6 months, back on the street. You know, like
right.
nothing's going to happen. Like if this was the United States, these guys would be looking at 10 to 15 years in the can.
Okay. It's November, December 2018. You're an independent director. You did get off your ass and go, and you saw plants that you didn't like. What do you do next?
You have one hell of a board meeting where there is blood on the table at the end of it.
What about when the chair of the board is so heavily invested in the company?
But are you not
That's whose
releasing
blood?
Are
Is
you
on the
releasing it
table.
to the public that day?
Absolutely.
Right? You have to.
Because you're their voice.
Timely disclosure.
If you're the guy who hung up the walls, are you a whistleblower?
Oh, I think so.
Okay, well, first of all, you didn't commit a criminal offense. Okay,
No.
it's just a regulation, a violation
Okay.
of Health Canada regulations, so that's nothing. Are you part of a criminal conspiracy? I don't know what criminal act you're conspiring and agreeing to. But the guy, by his
I was
admission,
going whistleblower versus snitch. That's what I was.
well, what's the difference?
Well, the whistleblower could be someone innocent who tripped across something and then blew the whistle, despite grave
Okay, well, I mean,
danger against that
we're not
person,
talking about
financial or
crime
bodily.
here, okay? So it's very difficult to discern. But here's a guy, again, by his own
So-
admission, getting paid $15 an hour and being told to hang up these sheets so that Health Canada will be deceived. And he's thinking, I'm going to be holding the bag here,
Yeah.
if and when it happens. And so he dimed
So
them
this-
out to Health Canada.
So this
Do we
guy's a
know-
good guy.
Do we know anything about the circumstances of his disgruntlement? Because at one point he's being referred to as a disgruntled employee.
Well, I think he was
He was
disgruntled in the
$15
fact.
an hour.
I think he was.
There you go.
Yeah, he
That's enough to
was.
start.
Maybe he's a stockholder.
$15 an hour you can't afford to pay.
No, he's just this guy was just another guy, and he probably went home, sat down, talked to his wife, and she said, $15 an hour, rat him out.
Okay, what can, for both of you, independent directors, you're on the board, you're faced with this situation, what should you have done differently?
I would say that anyone who's a director on a board these days, particularly a board where there's formerly illegal commodities, or if you're in gaming, or if you're in the sins,
Mm-hmm.
you got to wake up. This is not just show up every 3 months and collect a check. You got to ask the right questions. You've got to find out what's going on the plant floor. Go down, engage the employees. You have to be aware.
As independent directors, we always need to be more inquisitive. We get co-opted by management far too readily.
Shouldn't
And
you
well said.
have a budget to hire a guy like him to advise you on
If
the
you
questions to be
have
asked?
if you have a whiff of a problem, absolutely. And I don't think you even need to ask for a budget. I think you just go ahead and hire the guy, and
We do it all the time.
You direct
Yeah.
that his fee
Yeah.
gets paid.
No, we
Okay.
do it all the time. Working as an advisor to boards, I do this quite often and get brought in for these things when there's been major mismanagement by senior executives. And quite often, those executives have they've gone, and then you have to go in there and figure out what was going on. And
But the point is that the
Yeah.
board member as an individual doesn't have the capacity for the kind of investigation that you're
No, of
talking
course
about. You need to get people like Chris who have the professional experience, who can cut short the process of turning over the rocks and finding what bugs crawl out from underneath.
what they should be doing is get this Lalone guy, the guy that was the whistleblower, the board, they should have him in front of the thing right now. Talk to him. Who told you what to do this? Who did it?
Yeah.
What did you do? When did you do it? Why did you do it? They've dumped all the emails already. They've got the smoking gun, but it's still a regulatory violation of Health Canada rules. That's all it is. Like, there's two separate issues here.
So
if-
I should
if there's
stop
some-
calling it a illegal activity.
It's not illegal by definition. I mean, if there is some insider trading, and that, again, that's only an allegation. But if there is, that would be a whole different thing. That would be a
But it
criminal thing.
seems pretty prima facie to have been acknowledged by the participants. And so I'm having a little struggle here with your being so holier than thou about
It
your
hasn't been in
allegation.
court yet.
No, it hasn't.
All
been
right.
in court.
And even everybody gets their day in court.
Yeah.
When you watch cops on TV, and it says these people are innocent until proven guilty, even though you can see them,
Judge Judy gets
punching the
after
guy in
them.
the nose.
Yeah,
So no, you still, this is a democracy. and we still have to give everybody that benefit until they're convicted of anything. These people aren't charged with any offense.
This stands as pretty good evidence.
Yeah, this is certainly a strong indicia of, we would certainly want to
Excuse
continue
me, sir.
it.
Tell me who filed these reports. And, well, I did.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
That cuts us right to the chase.
Yeah.
Okay, we
I had
talked,
an obligation to, though.
right.
This is
You made me.
The devil
You
made me
made me
do
admit
it
when I-
defense.
Yeah, right.
Okay, we talked about the directors. Let's talk about Mr. Acito. He started when? October?
Yeah.
It was already growing in October?
We don't know. The two are both said to have begun in October without having put numbers on that month. And so it seems to me unclear at this point.
So let's assume, for the sake of this discussion and for learning, that our CEO, Mr. Acito, didn't walk out of ING as a highfalutin executive and wandered.
CEO of a financial institution of some substance,
Right. And
having
didn't
come up
walk-
through the risk management side of that financial
Yeah.
institution, incidentally.
Right. So let's assume he didn't walk in the door and immediately say, let's grow some illegal cannabis. Let's assume he tripped over this,
Okay.
okay, resulting in the email,
Yeah.
resulting in the corporate governments. What should he have done?
Stop
Which
it.
he clearly did not do.
He clearly did not, but it would have been easy at that point because the sunk cost would have been negligible.
There
To
is
have
no
said-
cost.
You have to plant these little seeds.
That's good.
To have said, I'm sorry, guys, this is not the way public companies run. This is not the way any sensible private company runs. This is not the way any company that I have anything to do
Right.
with, let alone be CEO of, runs. That stops
So
today.
Chris, I didn't look this up. You may have, but I'm willing to bet that there's a control block who is the chairman, or he owns a significant piece. The chairman brought in Acito, the CEO. He's got a brand new big package. I didn't look up what it was, but it's probably large. He walks in and the first week he finds we're growing illegal cannabis. I mean, that's why he didn't do anything, right? I mean, that makes perfect sense.
It's possible. I don't know what's going on. The question is this: how much is the president of the company, the CEO of the company, on the shop floor?
We have one asset.
No, but really, how much? How much
And
is
it's
he
not
there?
that far away.
Is he here in Toronto or is he down there? He knows they have a big warehouse.
I'd be there once a week.
It's an hour and a quarter away.
But-
That's
no, I know that, and it should
People
be.
spend longer than an hour and a quarter commuting to the
I
jobs
know
from
that.
within Metro Toronto.
But the guy's a banker. Okay,
A
like-
risk management officer.
Yeah, but in the
background
bank, what
in-
what risk is there in the bank?
Excuse me.
Nothing. No, not like this.
I was a member of the management committee of Confederation.
Well, okay,
at the time of its
you get a
winding
pass for that
appointment,
one.
So, thank you.
I make money
know-
off Confed Life too. So that's all
I
right.
know a little bit about risk
No,
management.
my point is
financial
that
institutions. It's
Financial
their
institution
main
risk is completely
concern.
different than this kind of risk. This is operational risk.
It's different in nature, but
Yeah.
not in process, not in quality of what it is you do, not in inquisitiveness, not in terms of how you form policy, how you get policy passed through a board, how you ensure that your board members are informed. All of those things are indistinguishable, whether it's a financial institution or a cannabis pot company.
No, you're absolutely right. The problem, I think, is that there's if all of this was going on, everybody in the plant knew it. All the guys working there, all the $10 an hour guys knew it. Everybody
I
knew
actually
it.
logged onto their website today,
Yeah.
and I scrolled down through the who we are team.
Yeah.
And normally I expected that to start with the board and then get into the management going down. It started off with the management, so I went one by one. Started that out. There's at least 6 guys in the management team who absolutely had to know by their job titles.
And isn't this why Health Canada cannot give a pass on this?
Exactly. They have to make an example of this. It's mandatory.
I think so. It seems to me a stupid conversation to talk about what the CEO should have done differently. Like he should have just stopped it, right?
Yeah.
More interesting to me is the CFO.
And
Because I'm,
Is he still there?
yes.
no, they changed, I think they changed CFOs in, I'm making this up, February,
I was not aware of that.
So
Okay.
I think the fellow that is there now, I don't have his name. I didn't research him. But I do recall reading that or concluding that he started after the grow stopped, after it became legal.
Mm-hmm.
So you think they induced him to come in on the basis of?
I don't think he even knew. I think the old guy left, man, for some reason.
That's
if
all
it were me,
conjecture,
I would have
I
run. It's complete
Yeah.
conjecture.
It's all conjecture.
Right, but I'm an accountant. You're an accountant. What should the let's
The
say
CFO.
you figured it out.
Well, I can't conceive of any bright, competent, numerate CFO not being able quickly to make the relationships between the quantity that's being grown, the revenue that's being reported, and to have known that there was more revenue being recorded. Because don't forget, this is not just at the point of harvest.
Right. So
Under
this would have come out of my
IFRS.
model, is what you're saying. Like
Under
immediately would have come out of my
IFRS,
model.
this is a biological asset, which month by month you record
What
the
if-
increase in
But
value
what if
as
they
the
didn't-
plant
maybe they didn't
grows
count that inventory.
at the point of harvest and sale. You certainly are.
And they
It's
had
certainly-
sold some of it, so they had to. Some of it's already gone out
To
the
me,
door.
it's just unbelievable that he could
No,
not.
you didn't have to. You had to record the revenue and the cash, but you didn't have to record the inventory and the cost of goods sold.
As the
And if
audience
that's true,
begins
then
to
he's very
drop off with
complicit.
the chartered accountants talking in their own special private language,
All
everybody
right.
else is.
But so thank you for that. I think that's a good synopsis on this issue. I think there's serious accounting issues here. Any way you
Absolutely.
cut it.
Oh yeah.
I think there's professional issues. I think that the statements are misstated. I think that the one lesson, I don't know whether you would figure this out. I think if you had a rolling model like we build, it would become blatantly obvious. To your point.
Yeah.
If you're the CFO of a small company and you don't have a controller, you're the controller. Just like the director, get off your ass, go walk around,
Mhm.
talk to people, right? That's part of your job. How many CFOs do that? None.
I would have hoped a lot more than none, but
But it's,
it's always arguable. It's the personality of the individual, but this is more than a small company.
but it's even worse than that, Jay. You got the compliance officer, the guy who is supposed to be the last bastion of integrity,
acknowledging
that
the
they got
thing
our
is
license
corrupt.
gross.
Yeah. How much clearer does it get than that, Chris?
Well, there is a criminal offense in that regard, because if you sold unlicensed dope, that's a trafficking of drugs.
That's what I thought.
So yeah, there could be a conspiracy there.
Okay, Chris, changing topics.
All right.
There's an OSC investigation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the right words down, but in partnership or in coordination with the RCMP and OPP, they have some sort of,
Joint Serious Offense Task Force, whatever it's called. Yeah.
a lot of our viewers are outside of Ontario and also in the US. So could you just give a quick briefing on what that means?
Yeah, the difference between Canada and the United States is significant. In the United States, and I make the jokes that in the United States people actually go to jail for these offenses, which they do, and whereas in Canada you don't.
Maybe this will be the first, Chris. Maybe we should be hopeful.
Perhaps, and maybe unicorns will accompany us to the next podcast.
Boy, you are optimistic.
But okay, so what happens is you have a joint force of all the provincial and federal law enforcement people, and they work with our Securities Commission and they investigate these offenses. Their track record has been abysmal, and not because it's their fault. For example, in the United States, the SEC compels you to come in and sit down. They say, "We're going to talk to you, and you bring a lawyer, but you better tell us what went on, or you're going to be going inside." That doesn't happen in Canada. You don't have to respond to them. You can sit there and say nothing. The other big issue is that all of these cases involve lawyers, attorneys. When you go to search the lawyer's office, the first thing the lawyer says is, "I claim privilege over everything in this office." Then it has to go in front of a judge, and a judge decides what law enforcement is able to take from that confidential information and what they cannot. in Canada, it often takes up to 2 years before they get a hearing to go over the stuff that they've taken from this lawyer's office. By that time, investigators have moved on, people have changed, things have changed, and people
And
say,
it no longer is the buzz in the news.
exactly, nobody cares. And then you do a quick, okay, we'll plead out to this, and we'll do this, and you get a slap on the wrist, and we take away your birthday for a couple of years, and that's it.
The timeliness of enforcement is one of the saddest parts of the whole environment.
And that's where the United States is so far ahead of us on these things, and the UK too. They don't screw around. They act very decisively, and then they deal with the ancillary issues later.
They have a guy in an orange jumpsuit within weeks instead of years and years.
Yeah, you know, they do have
a CEO in an orange jumpsuit once.
They do have a problem in the United States as compared to us because they have a grand jury system, which we no longer have, and so they indict people, and a lot of people that are indicted from grand juries never end up going to court, never get convicted, because they indict them and then do the investigation quite often. Some of these securities
offenses. One-sided.
Yeah, whereas in this country, we do the investigation and then arrest them, but ultimately their system is more efficient than ours.
So the OSC, for those outside the jurisdiction, is the Ontario Securities Commission. They are the securities regulator. Think the SEC in the US or whatever your local regulator is.
Well, it's provincial. They are the lead regulator of all of the provinces.
Yes.
So within the country, the one that everybody looks to.
Right.
And because it's Ontario, that is the site of the Toronto Stock Exchange and even the Venture Exchange. And so the leading jurisdiction.
Jay, do you have a view as to the OSC versus the SEC on this particular case and how that breaks down from a regulatory perspective?
I don't have the personal experience with the SEC, Scott, that I do with the OSC. I consider the OSC generally to be oftentimes well-intentioned people, but without the resources, without the intellectual capability and capacity, without the budget, without the drive, and a whole lot of other things. Whereas, as Chris is saying, in the US, the SEC seems to have much sharper teeth, much greater capability for enforcement, and they seem to do their job.
Okay, so they're the regulator. RCMP and the OPP are the police, federal and provincial. What is criminal in this, and who's on the hook for that?
If there's insider trading, that's a criminal offense.
Yeah.
If there's drug trafficking, that's a whole other thing. But just on the security side of it, they will work together and see if they can gather evidence to convict individuals of insider trading.
So this you've used the words a serious crime unit or a serious.
Yes.
Right. So how's that defined? Do you know?
How long is a piece of rope? This is a
question of being designated that way and sent to that section.
How much press is it? How much news press is it getting?
Right. Okay.
How many members of parliament are talking about it?
So it's probable, in your experience, without having the facts, without being inside on this, that it's not necessarily the illegal growing that has caused this to be a serious offense, but the insider trading.
Yeah,
or maybe just the whole stench of the whole thing.
I don't think. Law enforcement won't give a damn about the illegal growing.
Yeah.
Okay. Health Canada would report it. Law enforcement would come and seize the drugs. They might charge somebody, but when it got to court, it's not like the guy was on the street dealing weed. He just broke the regulations, and that would be his defense.
That's completely news to me.
Yeah.
It makes sense when you say it, but the hysteria of this, the fog of war as a layman, you get into the illegal growing, and I've been focused on that.
Yeah.
After that, also they sold some stock.
It's understandable, Scott, that you are focused on that because it is absolutely blatant with senior officers skirting not just any kind of regulatory situation, but one that is so relatively new that it is in the public spotlight on a daily basis. There's hardly a day goes by that there's not an article in the Globe and Mail business section on the cannabis world. And these guys were apparently doing everything possible to pull the wool over the eyes of Health Canada, who have a heavy responsibility for trying to move, as Chris is saying, move this cannabis world from the black market into the legal market.
It's very much like the diesel emissions scandal, in a sense that senior management are having people change numbers and fudge things so that they get past the regulators and their numbers are better. And that's
Yeah.
corruption, basically.
And finally, they have gone after the CEO of Volkswagen, and
Yeah.
they seem to be actually taking that one seriously.
Oh,
But it's
yeah.
taken them years to do so. I've been surprised at how
Mhm.
slowly that's developed.
But it is the root of this. All of this is corruption.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And
Which is a combination, in my
Greed.
view, of not only the drug business, but the fact that we've created billions of dollars of market cap in this country.
what was the
In 2
expression?
years.
Infectious greed. Remember that?
Right, so you've got the tech boom combined with the drug business.
That's a
And so
winning
this-
cocktail.
This is not going to be the last of these, right?
Well,
I
it
mean, if
depends
it-
on how big a stink they create.
It'll be the last of this specific set of circumstances,
Yeah.
obviously. But just with the industry that it is and the wealth that's been created, there's a real temptation.
Well, I'll tell you something.
With a new
All right, we're back. We had a computer malfunction. We may still be recording live on YouTube for all we know. With black, so you're going to see a different screen, probably like a different visual, and probably different audio. But I've recorded on this webcam a lot, including the last show, so it works not bad. It's not as good as the studio setup we have, but anyways, we will edit this, put it back together. Fawad, that's on you. So Jay, to come back to where we were, we're just going to wrap up here in about 10 minutes. But I was asking you when we got cut off, your view of the sophistication of the boards of directors and management, CEO, CFO, the C-suite people in the cannabis industry in Canada. And I recognize as I ask that question that it's a relative question because, you have to be sophisticated for the wealth, the size of company that you are. So here we've got billions of dollars. We're in the drug business. And to me, a lot of the executives and the boards of these things are not equipped for that.
I'm going to give a slightly different view, Scott.
Okay.
I'm going to refer to the fact that partly because of how great opportunity this is, what a burgeoning industry, and the fact that arguably Canada is positioned to have some kind of world leadership. Whether that'll happen or not, that's still up for grabs.
Rather dubious leadership, though. That's where we lead the world in weed.
But we are respected for the fact that we introduced what is regarded around the world as being a good regulatory regime that is being emulated around the world. As a result,
But this isn't a regulatory issue. You've got
Sorry,
billion-dollar companies.
I'm going from that to the fact that it has attracted some very high-profile people, including, and I'll refer to the U.S. as well, not just Canada, but former cabinet ministers in the U.S., former very prominent advisors in the White House, and it is partly because there is so much money, but it is also because it is ripe for getting a proper start into a brand new industry. So it's like the tech revolution, except that this is not tech, this is agriculture. So it's an interesting situation. But as you well know, Scott, in one of my former situations, I shared a board chair with a former deputy premier of the province of Ontario, a man that I have the highest regard for and who was doing a great job coming from a political background, but giving that element to the board. And that board had been carefully selected to be drawing from a number of pools in which I, without wanting to get into self-aggrandizement, I think that I was identified as being from the financial pool, an interesting, experienced, capable, and full of integrity individual. Now, there are, by the nature of the background of this industry, many who come from the other side, and that's the world that Chris is going to regale us with. And so there is a mixture, and we have seen other examples of egregious behavior in the new companies, including in some of the big new companies. And I don't want to mention any names, but Afria comes to mind as being one that is just, to me, unexplainable as to some of the actions of the insiders in the past transactions.
How did we just pass on that? I was wondering that today on my drive down here.
I don't feel that I've passed on it. Notwithstanding that the individual that I'm citing is a former partner of mine in a way that I'm unbelievably embarrassed by, because my father, who was one of the prominent earlier individuals in that firm in the 50s and 60s, when
Who was Vic?
Vic Neufeld was a partner of EY.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You ever hear about Afria?
Whispers.
Yeah. Okay. What management team and boards of the Canadian LPs, are they up to this challenge?
Let me qualify my answer by saying this is the drug business, as I said earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and
Keep reminding.
and the
that.
people that they're using, many of them have been in the drug business for a very long time. People who are growing, people who are advising them on how to grow the weed, people who
on that physical side, that's
Yes.
undoubtedly
Yes.
true, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing, because they know how to grow good weed.
Well, it may be a good thing, but those people were part of a continuing criminal conspiracy for a very long time, and
Yep.
so they don't have the same
Yep.
ethical guidelines because they were involved in crime.
And they haven't been properly laundered to
They haven't been-
expunge,
they haven't,
expunge
yeah.
all of that past out.
I do due diligence for these law firms on a lot of these companies, and
We come up with some
we come up
interesting
with some,
facts.
we certainly do.
Yeah.
But I think what you wanted to talk about was the investigative aspect.
Yeah.
here.
So thank you. So lastly, Chris, they appointed a director to replace the CEO. So they appointed him as interim CEO, and he was a director at the time of the illegal grow. And then they set up, immediately preceding that, they set up an independent committee, independent in air quotes if you're listening to the podcast. So there were independent board members in the sense that they're independent from management, as we explained earlier. But their job was their self-stated mandate was to investigate.
Yeah.
And there's been no release that they hired an investigation firm. There's been no release they hired
With the
anybody
exception
external.
of McCarthy's.
There was a release and a continuing hammering home that they hired McCarthy Tetro, very blue chip Canadian law firm, does not,
But lawyers, not investigators.
does not smell
Those
to
are
me,
very different skill sets.
that smells to me of covering my ass as opposed to trying to investigate and save shareholder value. All right, that's fine. I have no insight on that whatsoever. That's just what it smells like to me. What should the company have done with respect to the investigation?
I think that the important thing about these kinds of things, you have to act quickly. When you have a problem like this, you identify who the individuals are that need to be interviewed, and they need to be interviewed immediately now. And then the investigators report back to the board and say, here's the fact situation as we've discovered it. You're going to generate a lot more informants, a lot more whistleblowers when you start interviewing people. Go down to the shop floor, talk to everyone.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take very long to do it. I have great respect for McCarthy's, a great firm. But as Jay said, lawyers are not investigators, although sometimes they think that they are. They have a tendency to not act as quickly as they need to.
And
At least
speed is absolutely
at least in my
essential in
experience.
this, before people get an opportunity to compare their stories and merge
Oh, yeah.
their stories.
What about
and
independence
cover.
though, beyond speed? I mean, shouldn't they have just recused themselves and hire somebody outside the firm?
I think they should have hired an outside firm. That's what we are, truth seekers, independent third parties. We have no skin in the game.
But be practical, Scott. They would never recuse themselves, because at this
Well, I'm
point,
sorry,
they're
I didn't mean recuse from a director recuse perspective. I just meant step away, let someone else run the investigation.
I think that what needs to be done
We
here
already
is an
established-
independent director has to be, like a new director who acts only for the shareholders has to be appointed or has to step up. Because everybody else seems to be tainted a little bit. I don't know. If you've been on this board already, it's highly, highly questionable whether this is going to continue. I think it may have gone. I don't know if it's salvageable.
I really don't think it is.
I keep tweeting it's going to zero. I take that as fact.
Sure, a lot of guys are short.
I think all 13 of my followers are on this. All right, let's wrap this thing up. The message that I took from this, apart from a great discussion, really a review of CannTrust, but as what could I do as a business owner? To me, it's know your business. Just get off your ass, go out, walk around,
Know your people.
understand your business, understand your people. If you have too much revenue, you should know it. Right, to your point. That's number one. And if something smells wrong, do something about it immediately, like today.
And if you're a private co and employing an advisory board or a board of directors, empower them. Give them the tools by which they can know what the business is and
Right.
be able to ask the right questions.
Right. And I would also add, correct me where I'm wrong, the point of a self-investigation is to find out what happened, create credibility with stakeholders, help yourself in court with regulators, right? And if you want any credibility on that at all, get somebody outside the firm.
Show you're doing
Who's
the
an
right
investigator.
thing. Yeah, show you're doing the right thing.
What else? What else did we learn today? Anything? Does that wrap it up?
Be candid at the earliest possible stage with all of your publics as to what you know. Don't be sitting on information the way it is clear that some board members in this situation sat on information for months and months and months.
So Mr. Aceto published a book, right? Something that we worked together or whatever. It's actually, I think it was a decently read book. And as I was coming down here in the Uber, I was on Twitter and somebody said, "We've read this so you don't have to." And then there was a link to it. And one of it's either a chapter or a section. I was on my phone, so I'm not sure. But it was, the essence of the message was, use white lies a lot so you lower people's stress level. Don't hold me to
Cuts
that.
down on
I
the
haven't
medical
read the book,
costs.
but that was the tweet I read.
On that note,
On that note, subscribe, please. Martinez
There
with
you
Scott
go.
on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Anything else? I think that's it.